Now, virtual desktops bring with them a whole new level of concern and lack of visibility when it comes to device monitoring. And one of the primary concerns that we hear from our customers and partners around the adoption of virtual desktop environments is, of course, the potential performance hit on the users. Being able to accurately demonstrate that application service levels as perceived by the user are being met is a fundamental requirement for both cloud-based virtual desktop solution providers as well as the virtual desktop engineering teams within all major corporations, whether they be outsourced or insourced. So let's talk a little bit about that. In order to close the visibility gap in a virtual desktop environment, there are three blind spots that need to be illuminated. The first is infrastructure latency, which represents the total network and server time spent until the virtual desktop receives a response from the app. The second is the actual application execution time spent by the virtual desktop or guest machine. And the third blind spot is the client-side latency as experienced by the user himself. This is the latency of the remote display protocol that's responsible for painting the endpoint device's screen. Latencies of 0.3 seconds or above can result in very sluggish environments for the user. Ravi, let's take a look at showcasing some of the VDI monitoring capabilities in our next demo. You good? So we spoke about high remote display protocol latency between the actual users on their remote devices and the virtual desktops in the data center as being really probably the largest contributor to poor user experience in VDI environments. I said that ICA latency above 0.3 seconds will result in sluggish keyboard and screen response times for users, sometimes making it actually impossible to work. The chart you're looking at, the solid line on the chart you're looking at, shows the average ICA latency experienced for each user in the defined group or selected location. And you can see that ranges from about 0.1 to 0.25 seconds, while the shaded area of the chart represents the latency variance, which reaches as high as 0.35 seconds. Note the high ICA latency spike experienced by users in Washington and Massachusetts. By the way, ICA is just one remote display protocol. We support PCO-IP and RDP or others. Now, the data we're displaying in this chart live is used for both reporting but also for real-time incident detection, which we'll demo a little later. Users most often describe their IT experience in terms of the responsiveness of the application they use, and Dave touched on that. Having the empirical evidence to support user perception or not, that's the doctor story, is key in providing users and organizations with a confidence in adopting a VDI environment. Here we see performance comparisons of 4 applications: online banking, SAP, Outlook, and Clinical Manager, compared between physical desktop and virtual desktop users. The top chart represents average response time in seconds, while the bottom chart represents the transaction volume or activity volume for each group. Notice how SAP performs better in the VDI environment in this example, and also that Outlook is not being used on VDI at the time of this comparison. Now, flipping applications with platform types enables an even easier comparison. Here we quickly see that online banking and Clinical Manager apps perform far worse in the VDI environment as they do in physical desktops. Now, in order to understand how scarcity of VDI desktop resources impact application performance, it's vital to be able to trend desktop resource consumption metrics, such as CPU, memory, and I/O, for example, with transactional performance. And in this chart, we see how Aternity correlates business activity performance with device resource consumption and network latency. Specifically, we can see how Outlook activities are correlated with the guest CPU and the ICA latency, showing us that the open inbox activity's slow response is correlated with a high CPU on the guest machine. Pretty cool.